Welcome to Morning Briefing. This is episode 1. This is a State Defense Force podcast where we talk about the latest news, information, missions, and training of the State Defense Forces nationwide. Now, if you're brand new to State Defense Forces, you're not familiar with them, basically what the State Defense Forces are, they're a National Guard reserve. They're a force multiplier for the National Guard. They assist and augment National Guard forces in a multitude of missions ranging from medical, logistics, supply, administration, civil affairs, search and rescue, transportation, as well as engineering, communications, and a multitude of other assignments. The State Defense Forces are under the command of the governor of the state. So while the National Guard reports to the President of the United States, State Defense Forces are only under the command of the governor. The governor is basically the State Defense Forces commander-in-chief. When State Defense Forces are activated, they are subject to the state UCMJ, similar to the National Guard. UCMJ stands for Uniform Code of Military Justice. So the same rules, legalities that apply to a National Guard and Army soldier are applied to State Defense Force soldiers. State Defense Forces are listed under their state's constitution as military forces of the state, designed for activation to assist, augment the National Guard, or when the National Guard is deployed overseas, such as in World War I or World War II, to assume the duties of the National Guard, where that would be to respond to natural disasters, assume command of military outposts, armories, and bases, and basically provide the military assets of the state while the National Guard is deployed. During peacetime, the State Defense Forces just provide that force multiplied to the National Guard. So if a National Guard unit is short on 10 soldiers, they can actually look to the State Defense Force, say, hey, we need 10 extra guys to do supply work or to do transportation work. They could pull from those 10 soldiers and to fulfill their mission needs. Now, where do the State Defense Forces come from? Well, they've been around for about 100 years. They've been around since around 1917, when the Home Defense Act authorized the Secretary of War to equip Home Guards with missions on security and civil defense. The act authorized the Secretary of War during the emergency to issue from time to time to the several states and territories and the District of Columbia for the equipment of such Home Guards having the character of state police or constabulary, as may be organized in the direction of the governors of the several states. Now, when World War I occurred, the National Guard was deployed to Europe to fight the war. The State Defense Forces assumed the role of the National Guard. The war lasted about 1 year. The National Guard was returned back to the home states. By the end of the war, over 100,000 men were serving in 42 State Defense Forces, or also known as State Guards. This brings up something I want to mention. State Defense Forces are known in numerous states by a different name, by an alternate name. Many, like Georgia, Maryland, take the name Maryland State Defense Force or Georgia State Defense Force. However, California, New York, Texas are different. New York calls themselves the New York Guard, Texas calls them the Texas State Guard, and California calls themselves the California State Military Reserve. Even though they have that alternate name, they are, under their state constitution, authorized as a state defense force, even though they have that alternate title. After World War I, State Guards or State Defense Forces were reincorporated into the National Guard and then deactivated. 20 years later, upon the eve of World War II, the National Defense Act of 1916 was modified in 1940 to provide a more legal basis for these state troops, these state defense forces, and authorized support for them by the Secretary of War. State Defense Forces were intended to be a solely state force whose employment and composition were determined by the governors. State Defense Forces were used for 4 principal missions during World War II. Peacetime duties of the National Guard, which this is on the eve of December 7, 1941. So prior to December 7, 1941, they were engaged in peacetime duties of the National Guard. Full-time Guard duty in coastal areas during the year after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Auxiliary combat troops in the event of hostile invasion between 1942 and 1944, and after March 1944 provide internal security against espionage, sabotage, and domestic disorders. By the end of the war, over 170,000 troops were in the State Defense Forces. Once World War II ended and the National Guard was recalled back to the States, State Defense Forces were deactivated. Over the next half century, the State Defense Forces were repeatedly activated and deactivated depending on the conflict, such as the Korean conflict. In August 1950, the National Guard Association sponsored legislation to allow cadres of state military forces to be maintained at all times in addition to the National Guard. After the Korean War, the state defense forces were once again deactivated. In 1980, at the height of the Cold War, the State Defense Force program was revived to provide state troops for internal security in the event that the National Guard was mobilized. Just in case World War III happened, the homeland would be left without adequate forces to provide for civil security in the event of espionage, sabotage, raids by Soviet special forces, or nuclear attack. The Department of Defense agreed because of this. They would provide excess stocks of rifles, vehicles, uniforms, and radios that state defense forces would need for training and operations. Oversight of the State Defense Force program was assigned to the National Guard Bureau, which to this day monitors that program and regulates that program. Once Cold War ended, some state defense forces were deactivated, some stayed active until the next conflict, which arose on September 11, 2001. On that horrific day, many state defense forces were reactivated to deal with this new threat. On September 11, nearly 2,274 soldiers from 8 state defense forces were involved in responding to the September 11 terrorist attacks. They provided missions such as medical assistance, assistance for recovery efforts, backfilling deployed state National Guard units, providing security in critical sites and National Guard armories, as well as logistical support, which the New York Guard was doing at that time. Following the events of September 11, the state defense forces were routinely used in numerous capacities, mainly dealing with responding to natural disasters, augmenting and assisting the National Guard, as well as providing for homeland defense missions. A key mission of the state defense forces, the New York Guard in particular, was to augment the National Guard SURF-P team, which was the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear, High-Yield Explosive Enhanced Response Force/package. This team was designed for responding to weapons of mass destruction events. They augmented the National Guard component of that team. In 2005, the Louisiana State Guard, Virginia State Defense Force, Mississippi State Guard, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, California were all activated to assist the National Guard in disaster recovery operations during the 2005 Hurricane Katrina natural disaster. Numerous states were actually deployed outside of their own state. State defense forces such as the California State Military Reserve, the Maryland State Defense Force were deployed out of their state to assist the National Guard in devastated areas. In 2006, the Maryland State Defense Force was deployed with the Maryland Air National Guard to South Dakota to provide medical care for the Sioux tribe. In 2007, the Maryland State Defense Force was again activated and attached to a Maryland Air National Guard unit and were deployed out of the state, not only out of the state, but out of the country, and deployed to Europe to provide humanitarian aid to Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 2011 and 2012, the Maryland New York State Guard, Maryland State Defense Force, Georgia State Defense Force, and South Carolina State Guard were all activated to respond to Hurricanes Irene and Sandy during those 2 years. In 2015 and 2016, Texas State Guard, Georgia State Defense Force, and South Carolina State Guard were all activated to provide a response to the widespread flooding occurring in their states. In 2017, troops from the New York Guard, Virginia State Defense Force, Georgia State Defense Force, Puerto Rico State Guard were all activated to respond to the catastrophe that was occurring during that year with the repeated hurricanes that were devastating Puerto Rico and the eastern seaboard. Now, this is just a quick glimpse of some of the missions and activations state defense forces were involved in the last 100 years. I did not cover all of them. There's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of missions that each state defense forces were activated and responding. State defense forces are involved in numerous missions throughout the year, augmenting the National Guard, as well as fulfill state missions. In this podcast, we're actually going to dive throughout the episodes in covering certain missions here, as well as covering some of the missions that did occur over its 100-year history. The current missions of the State Defense Force, I'm just going to cover a few of them. There's lots and lots of them, but I just want to highlight a few that really stand out. The California State Military Reserve has a small arms training team that's devoted to assisting and augmenting the National Guard in the home state of California. The California State Military Reserve also has a force protection detachment, basically a military police detachment that assists with base security. California State Military Reserve Forces also provide logistical support during the wildfires recently that occurred. The Texas State Guard has even a maritime regiment that assists and augments the U.S. Coast Guard with boat crews. South Carolina State Guard provides troops to help support and augment South Carolina's Department of Corrections. The New York Guard provides engineers to build military operations on urbanized terrain, which are known in the military as MOUT, which is basically training facilities that are for the Army National Guard to help train them before their deployments overseas. The Virginia State Defense Force provides the National Guard with IMAP teams, IMA teams that are devoted to emergency radio communications, and the Washington State Guard provides troops with assisting with wildfire response and wildland firefighting. So these are just like a sample of some of the missions that the State Defense Forces are currently engaged in. There's numerous others which we'll be covering in this podcast, but basically I just wanted to make this quick overview of what the State Defense Forces are. If you're interested in the State Defense Forces, I would encourage you to go to statedefenseforce.com where you can find out more information. And if you're interested in joining the State Defense Forces, prior military are accepted as long as it's honorable discharge. You will return back at your old rank. And those that are not prior military, the State Defense Forces have an initial entry training program, which is very similar to the military boot camp basic training, where they provide you basic military training so this way you can work and train alongside National Guard forces. That does it for episode 1. I hope you guys subscribe to this podcast. We're going to have tons and tons of content for you guys over the next months and years, and we hope you join us. Until the next episode, we'll see you then.